So today is lesson 2 of Comp1006. And today we're going to look at connecting and saving data. How often will we have labs? There are 4 labs. So every few weeks there is a lab. There's 4 labs in total. Now the college has also announced, probably most of you saw the announcement. They said that all classes are remote unless required to be on campus, at least until reading week, and that they would assess after reading week. However, the announcement also said that only things that had to be on campus would be on campus, even in March and April. So I know several of you emailed me about this. So that means that realistically, our class is not going to be going back to campus. Our class is going to be online for the rest of the semester. I was hoping we could get to campus and I'd get to meet people face to face, but it doesn't look like that is going to happen. Where do you get your recorded sessions from? The recorded sessions are on Blackboard in the weekly learning folder and tools and resources. There's a link to the YouTube playlist. So you can find that on Blackboard. So what are we going to do today? We are going to look at connecting PHP pages to a MySQL database. And right now, for some reason, our AWS web server that we're going to be using, that you used last semester, it seems to be offline. I've been trying to connect to it unsuccessfully, and I know some students have been. I've sent a support ticket to our technicians who look after that server. They'll probably be available soon, so they may be able to sometimes that server hibernates, so that may be the issue. Yeah. So what we will do in the meantime is we have a couple things we need to do before we try to connect. But if we can't connect, we can just use a local database for today. Not a big deal. And then we can always move to using the AWS database next week. So if we have to work just locally on our laptops for today, it's not a big problem. We can do that. I also have a backup. I have a backup that I created on my own web server, a backup MySQL database that we could connect to if we need to. So don't worry, we've got a plan A is use our AWS database. Plan B is work locally. Plan C is use my own backup. So we've got it covered with or without our AWS server today. We're going to look at capturing data using HTML forms, which you probably you may have done a little bit of in your HTML fundamentals course from last term. So we'll review some of those concepts. And then we want to look at how do we actually take the data that we collect from a user in a form and how do we save it to a database so that we have it stored permanently. And if we can, we will use FTP. We'll deploy our files up to the web server and run them live on the internet. Again, this is pending our server coming back online. If that doesn't happen today, no problem. We will probably pass on Git for this week. We'll get into that in the next week or two, which I think in week 4. So using the chat, let's do a really quick review. I know the note here says breakout group. We're not going to use a breakout group. You can just use the chat. So tell me what's one thing you remember from last week, one thing you learned about PHP in last week's class that you did not know at the start of last week. Anything at all about PHP that we talked about that sticks in your mind that you remember, just throw it in the chat and I'll add it to this list. Don't look at your notes, just want to see what actually stuck between the ears. Okay, so it's used for dynamic content, yep. Thanks, Elena. Yeah, we need to make sure we use our file extension of .php and that we have the tags around our server-side scripting language. Okay, thanks, Marcelo. Right, it's an interpreted language. It's not compiled, it's interpreted. That's great. Anybody else? What do you remember from last week about PHP? So Sarah says, often uses camel case. Yep. that it's pretty simple. Yep. Anything else you remember about the PHP language or the syntax? Okay, thanks, Amit. Yeah, we can use multiple PHP tags. So we don't necessarily, we can have as many blocks of PHP code as we want. It runs on the server. Thanks, Daniel. Variables are prefixed with a $sign. And thank you, Tyler. It's important. We also noted that PHP variables, they were case sensitive. I'm actually just going to show you this one. As Amit said, we can use multiple PHP tags. So what does this actually look like? Maybe I'll pull up a file from last year's class near the end of the term. And we could actually see what a sort of fully complete file might look like. Maybe something like this. We can look. So let's see how many different blocks of PHP code. We've got some HTML. So we've got one set of PHP tags. So we've got a block of PHP script here. Oh, actually not that much on that page. Bad example. Would be this one. Sorry, this was the one I was looking for. So we'll see a whole bunch of blocks of code. So one at the top with a bunch of logic. Now there's a bunch of HTML. And then even inside the HTML form, we've got a second block, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this page has got 7 different blocks where you're sort of splicing together PHP and HTML. So Amit, yeah, absolutely right. Weekly learning. Tools and resources. I sent you, Paramveer, I sent you a message where the folder is, and you will see the link to the YouTube playlist in there. If ever for some reason you don't have Blackboard, you can always just go to YouTube and search my name as well, and you'll find the playlist for our class. So if you just search in-class screencasts, that's my channel. It should be the first one that comes up. Playlist. Here's our Monday class, Comp1006, Winter 2022. Okay, now notice I have another playlist where I'm wearing the same thing. This is my afternoon section. This is the Lakehead Georgian section of the same class. So this is called Comp1006G. So the lessons are similar, and you'll notice I'm always wearing the same thing because this is Monday morning. Am I using a standing desk? Yeah, I bought a desk last year. It's actually on a hydraulic. So sometimes I'll stand, sometimes usually 1 hour I stand, 1 hour I sit was actually, but the best $200 I ever spent. I got it on Amazon. If anybody's interested in it, I'll send you the link and show you. Here's the desk, here's the setup. I don't think you can see it very well. But I highly recommend it so that, oh, we don't need to watch that. Okay, so that's anything else about PHP we should add to our list? Pretty good list so far. Anything else you remember from last week? All right, I'll save that. And yes, thanks, Elena. So comments, Java style. So 2 slashes for a single line comment, or star slash slash and sorry, slash star star slash for a multi-line comment. Okay, so what are we doing today? We want to look at capturing and saving data. So the process looks something like this. We basically need 3 different components. It's possible to do with 2 components, but I find it's messier. The code is cleaner to divide this process into 3 components. So on the back end, we're going to have a database with a table in it. We need to set up some place, some container to store the information that we want to save. And you guys will be learning how to do this in your relational database class. Did you have that class last week, or was that one of the ones that got canceled? It was canceled. Okay. So we'll do a little work with the database today. We're then going to use 2 web pages. So the first one, we're going to have an HTML or PHP page that includes an HTML form. And the form is designed, whenever we want to get inputs from our users, those inputs have to live inside an HTML form. And you probably worked with forms in your HTML fundamentals class with Scott last semester. Am I right? Pretty sure that Scott includes some work with forms. Okay. So you know a little bit about designing forms and inputs. So we're going to build lots of forms in this class because anytime we want to get data from users, we need a form. And then the real kind of brains of the operation is this intermediate page. We're going to have a PHP page, so our form will be submitted to the server, typically using the post method, and we'll look at the post method in more detail in a bit today. And we've got a form that basically catches or receives this post, and it processes all the inputs. It then connects to the database and inserts the values into the database. So whenever any web page ever is saving data to the database, it's just this same process. There's really only one way to do this. There's not like 500 different ways to capture and save data from a web page. It all follows this same workflow with this lovely diagram I've created. What would be some common examples? I mean, we as users, we use web forms to submit data to a database every day. Can you think of one common example of a process you might do on a website? Okay. Shashank, in a way, yes. The login's a little different. I mean, we do this. We do have a login form that's posted and processed to the server. It doesn't typically save to the database. It usually checks the database. So part of it, yeah. Okay, posting to Twitter, exactly, Daniel. Anytime you make a post, right, there's a form. So I'll just go here to Twitter. We don't necessarily see the form, but it's right here, right? So I've got a form with some input, some way to submit, and that's exactly what will happen. In fact, if I inspect this element, we might even see somewhere in here there is a form. It's probably just really hard to see in their mess of divs. But somewhere in here there is a form. Okay, what else do you do? Yeah, that's right, Tarwin. We subscribe to a newsletter. Absolutely. We are adding our email address. It gets processed by PHP or another server-side script and gets entered in. Yeah, when we send an email through a web browser, that's right. It actually, so there's go here to my web portal or my company mail. Right, when I click compose, so these are all inputs, right? It will save the recipients, the subject, and the message text. This is just submitting a form. Yeah, when we search, That's right. Again, it's capturing input, sends it to the database. It usually saves the search term because search engines keep track of what people are searching for. And then it also does a query on the back end as well. Thanks, Amit. Even clicking like on something, right? So if I go and click here, if I click this, there's actually a form. This will actually submit and it'll increment the like counter in the database for that comment. So a huge number of the interactions that we do every day in all kinds of websites, when we register for a site, same thing. Any kind of registration, right? We get a form. So let's say I want to do something like, I want to sign up, let's say. And what am I going to get? I'm going to get a form to submit. So we use forms all the time, every day. So we're going to look at how does the process actually work. So let's have a look. Yeah, doing an e-transfer, right? Doing any kind of financial transaction, right? So when I do an e-transfer, I log into my bank. I have to, so my first input is who am I sending the money to, right? I put in an email address. I put in an amount. I might put in a message and a security question. I hit save. All of those inputs will get saved into the banking database, and then the money will get sent. So we do this all the time as end users. Today we're going to look at how do we do this as web developers. What does this process look like? So let's get into the details a little bit. So I like to think that using web forms, it's actually a lot like grocery shopping. You think about what happens in the grocery store, right? We collect a whole bunch of stuff, we store it in a container, and then we go and we do the processing, the payment, the checkout. We do this when it's all done, right? We don't pay for items as we put them in our grocery cart one at a time. And we don't know the price, the total value of our cart until we're done. So forms kind of work the same way. We collect all the inputs at once, and then we process them. We process them together. So the HTML form tag, there's no visual representation of a form. You don't actually see the form tag in the browser, but all our inputs have to be contained in a form. So designing forms, which I know you said you did do with Scott a little bit last semester, it's a little bit art and a little bit science, right? So we want to make our forms as easy to use as possible so that people fill them out and they give us all the data that we need and that data is in the correct format. So all of these, registration, doing a review, making a comment, all of these would use forms for capturing data. So we only need a couple things with forms. Number one is we always will need an opening and closing set of tags. Within our form tag, we're also going to use this attribute, method equals post. We'll look at post in a bit more detail in a little bit, and we'll talk about why it's important. The other attribute we're going to have is the action. So the action is the name of the page that's going to receive the form post and process the inputs. Now, some examples, if you look online, some developers have the forms post to themselves. So instead of using two different pages here, like I've outlined, I use one page for capturing the inputs and one page for processing. Some developers like to do this all on a single page. The code is much messier that way because then this page has to have two purposes. It has to be both the form for display and the process when the form's submitted. So you'll see some developers that do it all on a single page. I think it's much easier, especially when we're learning, much easier to do this in two separate files. So this action page, this is going to be our processing page. And this page must have a PHP extension because it's going to contain PHP code. We'll have inputs for all the values we want. Shashank, it's a good question. What's the standard practice? It depends a fair bit on the language that you're using, the server-side language that you're using. With PHP, the practice is much more commonly to use two different pages the way we are. With other architectures, other ways of doing things, like next fall when we're working with ASP.NET, we don't actually need a physical page to do the processing. The server-side script can just live in a code file on its own that does the processing and then redirects to another page. So instead of the processing being done by a physical PHP web page that can load in the browser, it's just done in a code library that lives in the server. So kind of depends. There isn't one standard. A very good question. And typically at the bottom of most forms, we usually have some kind of submit button that triggers the form submission when the user's done. And that button usually lives at the bottom of the form after a user's completed the inputs. And those buttons can say anything. It can say sign me up, it can say tweet, it can say submit, whatever. So each field, each value we want to store, we typically give it its own input in the form. And we've got a few fairly standard controls. Obviously, our single line text input is the most common. We can have drop-down lists or radio buttons when we want users to select one option from a list. So wherever we can give users lists, this is a good idea, right? Because it means it's easier for them to complete the forms and the data is standard. We can have checkboxes for yes, no fields. What's the difference? When would you use a select box and when would you use a radio button? I mean, they both have the same purpose to give the user a list of choices and let them choose one. How would you decide when to use the select box and when to use the radio button? Right, Daniel, I think that's the key. When you have a lot of choices, we're going to use a select box because it only displays one at a time. So it doesn't take up a lot of space on our screen. Radio buttons are preferable in a way because we can see all the choices without having to click, but a radio button only works when we have maybe, I would say not more than 4 or 5 choices. After that, the radio buttons just become too long and we're better off with a select box. Okay, so I've already gone over this slide. You can skip it. So then what actually happens over here on the PHP page? How do we read these values? So if we set our method to post in the form, all of the form inputs are automatically added by the PHP processor to an array that's called $_post. So it's a list of all of the values that were entered in the form by the user. So for example, if we had an input in our form called first_name, we could access the value with this syntax, $_post, square bracket, single quotes, and then the name of the field. And typically, we would then store this into a simple variable. So we're going to use this syntax, this $post, we're going to use it to process all of our form inputs. So once we can read these form inputs, we now need to save them. So we would create a table in our database. We would build the form that matches the table. So each column in the table will have an input in the form. So let's say, for example, for a subscription, Sarah mentioned, signing up for a subscription. Maybe the only thing we need from somebody is their email address. Well, in that case, the table is going to have a field for a column for the email address, and our input form will also have an input asking users to enter their email. So then our PHP page will capture all the form inputs, it will connect to the database, and then we're going to use the SQL, the structured query language, which you're going to learn in your database class, to actually save the values. So we'll look at, if you had your database class last week, you would have looked at already building a table, but we'll do that together today. And we'll create our form, and then we'll build our PHP page. So all the pages that save to a database, it's the same process. Doesn't matter if we're saving a tweet, a newsletter subscription, sending an online transfer, creating an online email. These steps that you see are the same over and over and over again. Capture what's in the form, connect to the database, set up our insert, add each value to the insert, save it to the database, disconnect, and give some kind of cue to the user that the information got saved. Either we show them a message or we redirect them to another page. So we're going to do this process over and over and over again, and it's going to get familiar. So I might refer to a few things in these slides as we go on today. They are here for you to reference, the lesson 2 slides. Okay, so we're going to need to connect to our database. I'm going to try the AWS server one more time. I don't expect it's going to work, but I'm going to try to connect. If this doesn't work, then we're going to look at getting connected. Okay, Shashank, you try it again. I didn't expect it was working. That's okay. Okay, and you didn't have your relational database class. Let me think for a minute. First, let's see. So we might have to install the MySQL database on our computers. When you do a search in the search box, just type MySQL and see if anything comes up on your computer. You probably don't have it installed yet. Because we'll want this program called Mysql Workbench. You're going to need it in this class. You're going to need it in your relational database class. Let me know, do you have MySQL? Probably you don't. Okay. So Daniel, you have it. Okay, Belinda doesn't. Tyler doesn't. Okay, let's install that first. This is free software. If you have it, great. So I will show you where to get it. I'll put the link in the chat. So if you don't have MySQL, we're going to install it. It should recognize your operating system. Okay, that's fine. Elena, don't worry. I know we're going to do it from step 1. Then you'll also be prepared for your relational database class because you're going to be using it in that class as well. Okay, so we're going to click here, this go to download page. I'll actually put this link right in the chat. Sorry, you can go straight here. So, yeah, you can download either of these versions. Matsutsugo, you know what? That's a good point. Your XAMPP install might include it. It might include it. So we may have it, but you still probably want Workbench. So if you install it again, it's okay. It does. Okay. All right. Well, let's try that. So let's open up XAMPP. You may still need Workbench. So let's try to start MySQL. Okay. So see if it starts. If it starts, it'll turn green, and the default port is 3306. Okay, good. Great. We'll also, Matatsugu, I don't think you need to. Try and install it. If it installs from here, then I don't think we need the community download. While we're here, we may as well start our Apache web server as well, because we'll be using our web server, not for a little while. We got to do some work in the database. So our server started. We may still need to install MySQL Workbench, however. So that's the program that we use for connecting to and managing MySQL databases. We can connect both to our local database, which we've now started, our local server, but we can also use it to connect to the AWS server once that server's up online, which it's not at the moment. So to try to connect to our MySQL server, now we're going to look for Workbench. This program you might still need to install. So do a search for the word Workbench. Okay, it runs on XAMPP, but when you search it, it doesn't appear. Okay, that's kind of what I assumed. Thank you, Jose. So we're going to install this program. I'll put the link here. So bear with me. We'll just find the link for Workbench. This should work. So we'll get the 64-bit. So I've put the link in the chat. I'll just pause the recording so you can download it from here. If you're watching the video later, I'll put the link in the lesson 2 folder. The link is broken. Okay, then just go here. Okay. Just go to the main Workbench page. I guess it took us back. So this is broken? Oh no, it's not broken. You just click no thanks, start my download. So that is the correct link that I put, the first one. That ends in 507335. It's not broken. They're trying to get you to sign up, which you don't need to do. You just click no thanks, just start my download. So download and install Workbench. I'll just pause the recording for a few minutes while people do that. Give me a thumbs up when you have Workbench installed. So we're going to connect. I'll show you the instructions for how to connect to your local server. They are here in links and useful links and resources. There is a file here, instructions on how to connect to your database. Okay. So I've got instructions both on how to connect to AWS. I'll update this to include our local connection. We're not really going to use the local connection after today. We will use AWS, but because our AWS server isn't online, we'll work locally for now. So you should get a page that looks like this. It says MySQL connections. And whoops. You click on the plus sign beside MySQL connection. So we'll just call this, give it a name of, I don't know, local-server. We shouldn't actually have to change anything else. So the host name, we want to connect to our own server. And that's always represented by the IP address 127.0.0.1. The port will default to 3306 because MySQL always runs on 3306 unless we change it. The username by default is root. And if we had a password, we would put it in here. But again, when we install MySQL, the default is it gives us a username of root with no password. So I haven't had to change anything in the parameters. All I really have to do is give the connection a name. So I just called it local server. And now I'll click test connection. Oh, this is just because MySQL, my version is older. You probably don't get this warning. You should get this message. Successfully made the connection. Okay, a warning you can ignore. If you got an error, make sure your MySQL server is running here in XAMPP. It's got to be green. Oh yeah, we can fix the Ssl error. Okay. Yeah, there's a way around this. Bear with me. So here on this tab, click SSL. What does it say for use SSL? Mina, you have to click the plus sign to create the connection. That's what brings up this window. We have to create the connection first. That's what we're doing now. So the second tab says SSL. What does yours say? For use SSL, mine says if available. Yeah, change it to if available. We don't need SSL when we're working on our own computer. We know it's secure. Okay, so we're going to have to turn that off. So use SSL, no, or if available, you don't have those options, correct? Okay, looks like everyone's got the same. Okay. That's going to be a challenge. So working with our local server. Bear with me for a sec. Let's see what we can do. Okay, let's try that. There's also a web-based client called Phpmyadmin. We may be able to use this. So in XAMPP, beside the stop button, there's an admin button here. So make sure you've started both the Apache and MySQL services. They're both green. Click the admin button. Do you get a page like this? Okay. So we will skip past Workbench for today. We'll use the Phpmyadmin site instead. This is like a substitute. Workbench is better, but this will work. Okay. So up here, let's click on databases. So I've got a few databases in my server. So we're going to create a database for our, what do we call our application we're going to build? PHP Flicks? Aren't we building a movie store? Is that right? Yeah, we created PHP Flix. So let's create a database with the same name, PHP Flix. Make sure there's no spaces in the name, and let's click Create. So we've now got this empty database. So every web application we build, we're going to build, typically we would build a separate database for that application. So now we've got a local database, but our database is empty. So we can't save any information into it yet. Okay, so again, I'll just review our steps. We opened up XAMPP. We started the Apache web server and the MySQL database server. We clicked on admin beside MySQL, which brought us to localhost Phpmyadmin. And then we used the database's link to create a new database called PHP Flix. So we've now got an empty database we can start to work with. So Tyler, you get an error in the browser when you click it, or you get the error inside of XAMPP? I'm going to pause the recording here. We will take a break for 10 minutes, but I will stick around and I can help troubleshoot. Okay, so if you've got your database created, go take a break, go take 10 minutes, and we will resume shortly.